everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar today with Amanda Corral. This is part of our PepsiCo Expert AMA sessions brought to you by WomanMade, a PepsiCo initiative for supporting female founders, and Alice, which is a free platform for starting and growing your business at helloalice.com. So today we're going to be talking with Amanda all about media, storytelling, maximizing ROI, and pretty much everything marketing related. So if at any point you have questions for Amanda, feel free to put them either in the chat or in the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And we will work those into the conversation. So make sure you're asking them all throughout the webinar, and we will be getting those to Amanda so that you can hear her expert advice. So Amanda is the Director of Paid Media and Analytics at PepsiCo, and she works through a lot of really exciting things. Amanda, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey guys, Amanda. I've been at Pepsi now a little over 2 years, working on paid media the whole time I've been here. Previous to that, I actually worked on the restaurant side. So I worked for a Tex-Mex chain on the border, restaurants running their digital and e-com. And then prior to that, Pizza Hut running CRM and loyalty programs. And then previous to that, I was on the agency side. So have been in kind of digital and media and e-com for a while now. Was lucky enough to land here at PepsiCo, specifically working on the Frito-Lay North America business from a paid media perspective. So the team and I kind of manage all paid brand media, and we've got about 14 brands that have paid media here at Frito-Lay. We have quite a robust portfolio. So we get the opportunity to work across all of them, which is amazing, and kind of manage a media budget across that portfolio. So we do all the modeling and budget allocation from a brand across the brands. We also do it at a brand level across channels. So all the media planning, execution, and analytics and measurement, and measuring the impact to the business. So that's what the team and I get to do here. So it's been very exciting, and we've gotten to do a lot of really cool and fun things, and excited to kind of share my perspective with you guys, and hope that can give you some insights, or maybe just kind of help you think a little bit differently about paid media, and answer some of your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. And I'm Sandra Crawford from Alice, helloalice.com, and I do marketing and events at Alice. So I am also very eager to learn from Amanda a little bit more about paid media. So Amanda, let's get started with first question here. How does PepsiCo use paid media, and what are the various channels that you're responsible for?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we use paid media. One of the big drivers, I think the two biggest objectives we have for paid media are driving return to the business. So media is an investment, it is a growth driver. So we are constantly optimizing and validating through modeling that our media is driving the growth and the return that it needs to. And I think the second part of that is also just building brand equity for some of our biggest and smallest brands. So we do a lot of media partnerships for our programs, and kind of now that the media landscape is so broad, you can really find these media partners that have a lot of credibility or can bring ideas to life to kind of build that brand equity. So I think that's probably the second pillar for us, and it's just managing that kind of short and long-term objectives and benefits. So we have a lot of those conversations as we're talking about budget allocation and what partners we're choosing in our channel allocation. I am across all paid media, so all traditional and digital, so TV, radio, some print that we used to do, and then all of digital, which is pretty vast now with online video and social, and like I said, partnerships and programmatic, streaming audio. So across it all, which is really great as well.
Wow, that is amazing. That's a big gamut of everything that you're doing there. So I'm wondering, what are the key metrics that you're tracking, and how do those maybe vary across those channels?
Yeah, so I would say, I'll go back to ROI. A lot, like I said, what we did, we managed the budget and allocation across brands and channels. And so we're constantly through MMM modeling, kind of validating and monitoring that the investments that we're making at a brand level and at a channel level are returning to the portfolio. We have a very distinct portfolio in the sense that it's very salty snack, and we have a lot of the brands that sit within that category. And you buy multiple salty snacks when you go to the grocery store. So a Lay's ad can push Lay's and Cheetos, right? So we do really look at ROI, and we're very focused on that. From like a brand equity standpoint, we really like to we do leverage kind of brand lift studies and look and try to understand, are we changing, are we affecting message association or kind of how people feel about our brands or what they're associating them with. So if we've got brands that want to be associated with in sneaker culture or music or things like that, we tend to choose partners that can kind of help build that equity for us and then measure that impact through brand lift. Afterwards, it's a little bit harder for us. We've got to invest in some of these measurements because we are not a direct response brand. So I can't see actual conversion all the way through, where in some of my other businesses like that I worked with previously, like a Pizza Hut, like I could see all the way through conversion. So we do invest in some of those measurement capabilities that can kind of help us understand the impact that our media's really driving. But, I think outside of that, what we really like to look at is kind of reach. Like how many people are we reaching? I really always encourage people to kind of think about paid, owned, and earned media and really what are the objectives between the three of those, because you can have very strong owned properties like an email program or a community or your organic social following or your community management, where people are kind of coming to you and opting in to hearing from you. You're not having to pay to get that message in front of them. They're saying, hey, I want to hear from you. And so from a paid perspective, it's really, hey, how can I make that impression do what I need it to do most effectively? So reach is a really big one for us. We're just trying to reach as many people in our target audience as we can for that brand, and how do we expand that reach? And some platforms have really good reach if you think about like a Facebook. And then, what's that most impactful message that it makes sense for me to invest paid to get in front of them that we really think is going to drive them to conversion.
That's great. And so you talked a little bit about the ad making the customer do kind of what you want. Could you walk us through a funnel if that's how you have it set up, of like how many touch points does that take, or what are the different types of like conversions that you're looking for if it's not straight up buying the snack at first, right?
Yeah. That's anyone in a multi-touch attribution is a hard thing to get to understand. It's even harder for us because we don't have that, like based on your behavior and how we're exposing you to the ad, we can't truly tell that you're converting, because even in our business, a click, driving to what would really actually indicate that, when you go to the grocery store the next time, that you're going to pick up one of our brands. So it's a little bit different, a little bit more challenging for us, but I do think about that funnel, right? And if you started awareness, it's that reach, those impressions, and then you get down to consideration, a click through, your search, is your search going up, search intent, or people kind of starting to lean in a little bit more, and then down to that conversion, which is more of a delayed for us because we have to kind of invest in some of that measurement to truly understand if they've converted. In businesses that have e-commerce, or even when I was on the border side, I could measure conversion through to a to-go order, things like that. But for an in-store, there were actions that I could tell, like if you were clicking through to the website and going and try to find a store location or looking at the menu, that's a very good indication of consideration that you've gotten them a little bit further down the funnel and on their way to conversion. So we used to kind of measure and look at that and kind of use optimization on how do we drive in-store, in-restaurant traffic, and how can we find those indicators that we know. I think we also look at here recipe content. And if someone is clicking through to look at a recipe, right, they're leaning in a little bit. They're kind of in that consideration mindset. So you kind of have to figure out from your business, if you can't fully see the whole conversion or the whole journey, what are some of those indicators in between that can kind of help show you that you're at least getting them a little bit down the funnel. It's just a little bit harder in the CPG world. We're not as fortunate to have that full visibility of the customer journey.
Yeah, definitely. So what should a marketer, a founder, for example, in food and bev, that maybe can track those points, like you were mentioning of your previous experience with Pizza Hut and On the Border, what are those kind of things that they should be looking for when they're analyzing their data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I was always very hyper-focused on conversion rates. So whatever that conversion was on my website was all the way through to an order, or some of those if you were trying to do lead generation, getting people's information or making a reservation or reaching out to you. Where is that traffic coming from on the site, right? And how do what has that the highest conversion rate? You tend to see sometimes organic or direct kind of naturally has that because people have that intent, and some of the paid stuff is a little bit less because they might have not had that intent as they were scrolling through Facebook and saw an ad and then kind of was like, oh, I'm a little bit interested. So I think always looking at where your sources are coming from and kind of optimizing to that. But with that, you have to take into account, the costs, right? Mm-hmm. So say your email program has a very high conversion rate. You might lean in there for specific things and then only invest in paid where you're not quite getting the response that you want, or you've got a different message for a different target audience or something like that. But I always looked at that and where the sources were coming from. Obviously, how do you minimize clicks to get them to conversion and make that journey real simple? Mm-hmm. But then you also have to remember, you always have to keep in mind that ROI piece of it. What's that? What did you have to invest to get that return? And how do you kind of optimize that? Because you might have a very high converting tactic, but maybe it was expensive media. Right. So did it really yield what you needed to? So I think that's why we have that a little bit more of a focus on the ROI, because you can have very effective media, but if you're not looking at what the investment was, it can be a little bit wishy-washy on that. So I would recommend looking at that, and definitely, I mean, most businesses that have e-com or have those things, they're usually hypersensitive to their conversion rates and optimizing that. So you guys probably know better than I would ever know what converts highly on your business. But then I think when you start investing in paid, is really good to kind of understand what are those messages that are getting people to actually click out of that experience and into your conversion funnel or into your customer journey. Because I think that's very different than what we have, at Frito-Lay when we're talking about Doritos or Cheetos. We're just trying to get the message out there, keep it top of mind. We're not clicking people out of the experience that they're already on. So if you think about YouTube, you're going there for a video. We're just trying to kind of drive that awareness, or Facebook or Snap, to get people to actually click out of that experience has to be a very impactful message, right? Because they weren't seeking out that information, you presented it to them. And so to get them to click and kind of get in your funnel, it's always good to kind of test some of those different messages that are getting more of that kind of lean into that consideration and then down to conversion. So I always recommend, if you can, and if you are investing in paid media, really start looking at that message that's leading to more clicks and more conversions.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you decide when you change tactics then? Is it all based on that ROI number and the conversion rate, or are there any other kind of data points there?
Yeah, and we are hyper focused on CPMs, right? Because that's that efficiency side of the equation. So usually when we're managing campaigns, we're fortunate enough that we, have lots of channels turned on. And so you just have to kind of manage that a little bit. And we will set kind of thresholds where we know, hey, if a certain channel is costing a little bit more, a Facebook is less effective than YouTube, and that's just because of the channel that it is that you're putting the ad on. But a Facebook can be more efficient, so your return, you have to that's where you have to really balance it. Whereas YouTube is a more leaned in, sound on environment. You're going there to watch videos, so a pre-roll, you're gonna have a little bit more attention of a consumer than someone who's just kind of scrolling through their feed. You got to get their attention real quick. So that's where you have to kind of balance that investment that you're putting in there to drive that efficiency and that effectiveness to drive the return. So I know like social is definitely a place where a lot of new businesses, all businesses are on there. We're seeing impact to cost there just because the demand is so high. You've got a lot of politics ads on there, you've got food, you've got direct response, you've got insurance, you've pretty much got every vertical buying ads on that platform. But they're usually pretty efficient and their reach is high because everyone's got Facebook and Instagram now. So, it's kind of just trying to decide what's your KPI. So if your reach, you might lean in there. If you've got more of a complex message or something like through video, you might lead into an online video platform. If you're trying to reach a younger audience, you might lean into another platform like a Snapchat. So I think it just really depends on your objective and making sure you're picking the right channel. So it can vary for us. I think one of the big conversations we have a lot is TV and digital, and how do we kind of make sure we're managing our return, but also following where consumers are going. The space is constantly being disruptive, right? When, you got all these OTT services and all these subscriptions, and next year we've got even more subscription services where you can watch content. So I think that's, as we look into the future, is how can we just make sure we're getting our brands in front of eyeballs, since now there's just so many places people are consuming content now. So
absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned YouTube specifically and all these streaming services. We actually had a question come in from an audience member about online video ads. So Jim Karachi asks, online video advertising is still somewhat the Wild West. Marketers buy video impressions often with a viewability threshold of 60% or 70%. And even those viewable impressions are only required to be 50% on screen for 2 seconds, according to the IAB. The bar remains low, he says. How can you be sure that your video ads are seen and remembered by your target audience?
Yeah, it's a good question. It all is, even at the platforms, what they call views vary based on how many seconds, someone saw the content. So whether you agree if that's really a view or not, it's how they say that they quantify it as a view. I think, we leverage tagging, we leverage moat to kind of understand that viewability. It is hard. And even though you might be on a screen, they might not be looking at it. So I think where we always kind of look and through measurement is it being effective? Is it driving the results that we need it to? I think for a lot of smaller businesses that might not have that measurement are people talking about it? Are people responding to your video? Are people clicking through? But it is kind of hard when you're buying programmatic or pre-roll and you're not getting that back. You're just getting impressions and views and click-throughs, which, like I said, in the online video world, it's kind of hard to get a click-through. So it is a tough question. I don't know if I have the specific answer for you. But if you feel like it's a little bit more of a black box than some of the other channels where you might be able to track that a little bit better, I would encourage you to test different channels.
Yeah, that was a great question, Jim. Thanks for writing that in. For our audience joining, if you haven't already asked questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so you can type in your questions for Amanda throughout this session. So Amanda, for well-performing ads, either if that's digital or traditional marketing, how do you adjust your spend? Do you throw more money at them? Do you have to really consider a lot of budgetary issues there? Or what do you do if you have a really well-performing ad?
Yeah, it's a little bit different in my position now, right? Because we've done a lot of analytics on like how much we should be investing and looking at saturation on the channel and things like that. I do think that there are times where in my past or in other things, it's like, hey, how much do we need to push to get this message out? Or sometimes, we work with our team here, our internal team that does social, from an organic standpoint, and you want to invest to kind of start that flywheel of earned. I think that's a lot of conversations that we have, because paid can kind of fit in its own specific bucket of like, how do we drive conversion, or how do we have that specific objective that we're trying to hit that the other channels can't do for us? How do we get that message in front of the eyeballs that we want it to, whether they've opted in to getting messages from us or not? But I think where we have a lot of conversations is from an earned, an owned perspective, is where paid can kind of help with some of that, which is very engagement oriented and things like that. A lot of people ask me, should they be boosting their organic posts? And if engagement is one of your objectives, then it always helps to put some money to kind of start that earned, right? And then get it in front of some people and shares and likes and people tagging people in it, and see if that kind of helps accelerate it. But engagement isn't for us, a big objective for paid media. So it's a little bit different for us and how we make that decision. We know based on reach and CPM and frequency and some of those things, what are some of those thresholds and best practices that will yield that ROI for us through lots of years of modeling and analytics. So we tend to lean into that. I think with new channels, whereas we don't have as much history, we're just trying to kind of leverage what we know works, and test and learn as we go. But I think as streaming audio and Snapchats and some of these newer platforms, it's been a journey, and I wouldn't say that it takes time to get really good at it, and everyone needs to test and learn, because every business is different. People have different target audiences. So you kind of need to start putting things out there and testing things. I think that's always a good objective to kind of have, is you might, and it could be a simple test. It can be 2 messages to see which one is resonating more based on clicks, or maybe engagements is something good for you as a smaller business, or community management, things like that. Is at least test 2 messages so that you come out of it with a learning.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a great advice. We have a question on this same topic about conversion rates. So Kate Flynn wrote in to ask, do you have any benchmarks on what a good conversion rate is for a CPG brand?
I don't, because we have our own benchmarks. We benchmark against ourselves. I think my biggest advice there would be to just get better, right? We do that to ourselves too. Like, what was our conversion rate last year? Or what was our conversion rate this channel for this channel? It's like, and how do we just keep growing that and getting better and improving as we go? Because I think every business is different, right? I think, and for us, we're measuring conversion rate, after the fact. So it's a little bit different if you have more of a direct response. So I don't know if I can give you that benchmark, but I would just encourage of just evolving and getting better and pushing to improve yourself year over year or month over month or day over day, whatever makes the most sense for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely difficult to say one way or the other, like industry wide, or it definitely
Yes.
depends on the business, right?
Yes.
So how do you, how often do you check your ad performance, and what are some of the ways that you track, like which tools do you use to track which ads are doing the best?
Yeah, so, I will have to definitely give credit where credit's due, as our agency is definitely all over all of our campaigns and optimizing that. So I have less experience in that actual day-to-day. But like I mentioned, we know, and we've got those thresholds. So how much we're willing to pay for that impression on that platform, how much reach we really want to get. And so that's usually more of those performance-based metrics that we're looking at. And then again, especially within a campaign, trying to understand that, or some of those metrics within different messages or different creatives or different audiences, and we're seeing one perform better than the other, then that's when you can be a little bit more fluid within the platforms to make some of those shifts. So again, I always encourage you to do that, whether you're testing different audiences or different messages or different creative, so that you can do some of that optimization, to whatever that success metric looks like for you. But I think, reach, CPM is definitely one that we look very closely at. And less so, we are looking at engagement and some of that stuff, but we just know our thresholds that are going to correlate to kind of that ROI to drive the business. So we're hyper focused on some of those.
Got it. And can you speak a little bit more to working with an agency? What are some of the things that founders might need to keep in mind when they're working with a marketing agency to ensure that they're staying on track with their goals?
Yeah. Coming from agencies and then always on the brand side or client side, I've worked with agencies. We couldn't do anything without our agency partners. And so I think it's really good to have a good relationship and understanding with your agency partners, and really making sure they feel, invested in the business and the outcome, very clear on the objective and the direction. Because I think when you get to a place where you've got that really good relationship and that trust and transparency, that's when things really excel, and you get better work, and you're better because of them and they're better because of you. So I think that's always good to kind of work on that relationship, be very clear on your objectives for them and what your expectations are. I think if you build that really great relationship with your agencies, you can have those conversations. Some people try to feel like they need to just always have a very positive relationship with your agency, and I think it can always be positive, and you can still have those tough conversations. I think transparency is super important, and that's on both sides. So having transparency into your agency and how they function and what they're charging you for, as well as transparency on our side, expectations, objectives, key stakeholders, some of that stuff. I think some of my other advice would just be, I always say this to people, your CPM, your cost, per 1,000 impressions, always, if it's going through an agency, always ask them, like, what is in those costs? So how much of that is actually going to impressions versus managed services or technology or things like that? Because, agencies do have to make money. So it's always good just to have transparency into those costs. So how much you actually investing to get your message out. And then, who's working on your account, who are the people that are responsible, what their process is, and then just, building that relationship. over time and really, but I just have found that transparency can go a long way and can help build a lot of respect between client and agencies.
Yeah, that's a really great takeaway. I want to shift topics a little bit here and talk a little bit more about your expertise with storytelling. So, how do you tell a story with your marketing, and how does storytelling integrate into a holistic communication strategy for paid, owned, earned media, etc.?
Yes. I think that's where, and a lot of our brand teams really get to own that and do really well at storytelling. But I think that's where building that or making sure you have that full ecosystem. Sometimes people feel like they've got to tell the whole story in paid. And that's not always the case, because you might have some pretty powerful owned properties, or earned might be able to take some of that story, and paid can take some of that story. And so focusing your objectives, I think, is something we always push for on the media side, because paid can't do everything for you, or it's not going to do, we'd rather do one or a few things really well than try to do everything. So I think understanding that ecosystem that you have within your brand or your business and how you're talking to consumers. I think also, consistent storytelling. I think what your brand stands for and what your voice is, and that needs to make sure that always come through. But, we always look at like a Wendy's is, an example that always gets brought up. So you always see them in the news for whatever antics they did on Twitter or something like that. And their voice is very different on Twitter than in their TV ads. Mm-hmm. But it's still kind of all around the brand, and it's okay to do that, right? Because you're talking to different people in those channels, and it's okay to, adapt and engage with your consumers in different ways based on the channels that you're interacting with them on. So I think that's always a good thing to kind of think about too, is who are you really talking to? We used to, in an email program, right? You might get a lot more moms or value seekers in an email program, and they want to know about those things. They want value and they want offers, and they're probably less interested in hearing about, I don't know, your social impact. They might be, but I'm just kind of pulling that out. Whereas there might be another channel where you might get more communities, that want to hear about those things that are not opted in. So it's kind of understanding your target and your audience and what they want to hear and what really drives them, and delivering that message in the right way and with the most impactful message. So I think, storytelling can be a lot of different things. But here, I think at Frito, when we think about media, it's really that media ecosystem. And then the brand teams are really the ones that are pulling everything together and really saying, this is Dorito's story, this is what we stand for, and then this is how kind of we're activating it across all different channels. But it's hard. It's not an easy task, but as a business owner, you know it best. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of business owners, we have a question from Catherine Watt, which came in through the WomanMade community on this storytelling component. She asks, we're introducing a new way to shop for education and training. How do you talk to people about why they need something that they may have never considered in this way before? As in, yes, you need us, you just don't know it yet. Do you have any suggestions from your experience?
Yeah. I think every brand has that challenge of, how can I make the most impact, or how can I be thumb stopping, right? How can I get a consumer to stop scrolling or to pay attention? So that's where that creative impact is really important. But you also want to, it's a balance. I'm not going to have the answer for this one, but I will say on our side, like we really just want, again, driving, I would say for like our big brands, we don't need to always remind people what Lay's is, but we want to remind people about Lay's. So when we do paid in our creative, it needs to be very focused on the brand. It needs to be built for the platform. So if it's mobile and it's social, it's vertical. If it's online video, it's horizontal. Because we're paying for that impression, and people are skipping ads really quickly, right? You got a couple seconds, a second on social to kind of get their attention. So really, what do we want them to come out of that for that second is like, I want to remind you about Lay's. When you have more of a complicated or story that you need to tell to introduce people, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. And there might be channels that might be better at doing that, like an online video or things like that. But I don't have the answer for you on what that message is, but I will say to make sure that your brand is always super present. There is value. If you can get someone to watch your whole video and not skip your ad, there's a lot of value in that. But the quantities are those first couple seconds on social and the first, 5 seconds, if you think about YouTube, before they can hit the skip button. And so you need to be very clear about, who you are, what your brand is, be very visual in that. We've got some newer emerging brands that are, veggie based chips. And so a lot of the visuals are of the bag and the chips come out and they show all the veggies, and it's very like brick to forehead what you want the consumer to walk away from seeing this for 5 seconds. You don't want to be too complicated. So sometimes it's worth focusing on one message in each creative and then testing which one is making more of that impact, rather than trying to get it all in, because you're not going to get someone to watch your whole video unless you do an unskippable video, and those are very expensive. So focus on, brand awareness, making sure your brand is in there, it's impactful. I think on digital and especially mobile, you think about how small the screen is, you want there to be very tight framing. Because, if you're looking at your phone and it's a far away shot, it's very small. So you want it to be tight framing. You want it to be bright colors. You want it to stand out. You want it to catch people's eyes. So kind of always take that lens when you're looking at creative or you're working with your agencies is, hey, if I only have a couple seconds to grab this person's attention, what's a very simple message with very product forward, brand forward messaging that I can get in front of them, because you're spending money to get that message in front of them. So you want them to walk away with something, whether it's awareness of your product or your brand or what you do or what some of those benefits, highlighting a benefit. Keep it very simple and build the creative to be most impactful for the channel that it's on.
Yeah, absolutely. And a follow-up one, which is quite similar, Kathy John Joseph asks, how do you focus targeting with such a wide demographic base and product line? Does it take literally thousands of iterations for an ad creative to reach everyone?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. We joke sometimes because, it's like Lay's is for everybody. But there's specific things about Lay's that might resonate with certain people over others. Because we are very focused on ROI, we do like to keep a lot of our targeting, very broad with more personalized message. So, there might be a message that resonates more with women or men or occasion-based or interest-based or contextual-based on where you might be seeing the ad. But yeah, we've got some big brands and our buys are quite large, but we're not reaching everybody. If you look at a platform like Facebook, there's a lot of reach there. And so it's even, hard for us to reach everybody. We're not reaching everybody. And then it's like, even if we are they getting the message that they need from our ad units? So for bigger brands like us, we can kind of stretch that reach. But I think for smaller brands or smaller businesses, it does help to be a little bit more focused on what your audience is or what audience you might not be reaching in some of your other properties. and really kind of what's that objective? Are you trying to get a new audience, or are you trying to get your current audience to buy more? I think being a little bit more focused, where we try not to get too niche on our targeting, is because it gets a little bit more expensive. And with a focus on ROI, we have to balance those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our attendees asks, do you have any suggestions or advice on what to do if you're operating with basically no budget?
Yes. I think, it's hard. It's definitely hard. Being a paid person here, no budget is, my nightmare. So I sympathize with you, but I think, there's a lot of power in organic and owned properties, right? So, having a presence on social and engaging, I think community management is really good for smaller businesses. If people are commenting or asking questions or writing reviews about your business or your service or your product, I think responding to that and having that conversation is very valuable, because you're getting reach there. You're getting earned impressions. You're not having to pay for it. So it's actually, even better. If you have a website, in my past, making sure we were optimized for organic. So if people were searching for specific things, that our website was showing up for those things, and people were getting to us and finding us in those kind of search lean in moments organically, and then supplementing with where paid, where we might not have been as strong. So I do think that there's value in those owned and earned, and in those communications and those impressions that you're getting. There's still impressions and it's still reach. It's just coming from different ways. It's just not coming from paid. And some of those are more valuable. I mean, we can get to the masses when you put paid behind it, because you're paying to get your message in front of that person. But what comes with that interaction and owned and earned, is also very valuable, and if not, could be more valuable, because people are leaning in to you and appreciative. So in my On the Border days, reviews were very important for us. People you hear about this word of mouth. Recommendations really drives people's purchases or intent to purchase. So we were always asking, and reaching out and asking people to leave us reviews on our restaurants, trying to reply back to as much things as we could and have a conversation, whether it was positive or negative, addressing some of those negatives, and listening to our consumers. So they're all impressions. It's just whether you paid for it or you didn't. And so I would encourage to think about that way and really lean into some of those if you don't have the budget to start getting into paid yet.
Yeah, that's great advice. If someone does have limited funds, do you feel like there's a minimum amount of spend to make a paid campaign viable?
No, I don't think so. I think it's whatever's right for your budget. But as you look at that and you have a minimal amount of budget, you might want to just look at what's your reach going to be, or, what's your frequency? Do you think you need to hit them a couple times with a message? So you might, depending on your budget, you might run a campaign for 4 weeks, or maybe just run it for a week, right? And hit people a couple times. I don't have a lot of experience with some of those smaller budgets, and kind of managing what a campaign looks like there. But I don't think that there would be any reason to not do something, right? Because at the end of the day, you're paid, and your money and your budget is just getting to extend your message. So if you have limited funds, it's important for us too. It's important for everyone, but just make sure it's the most impactful message, and make sure you've looked at it and show other people, and look at it on your phone. Sometimes, like within Ads Manager, you can test it in a scrolling environment. So I would encourage people to just make sure, because it is investment to put out there, and it's heartbreaking if it doesn't yield anything. So do whatever you can that's in your control to make sure it's the hardest working thing, and then put it out there and do some testing and learn from it and evolve and grow. I mean, to be honest, was a little nervous with the idea of this as being an expert AMA. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I'm constantly learning. I learn something new every day, and we're testing things. And especially in the media and digital space, I don't know if you can ever be an expert because it's constantly changing. So I think fostering that test and learn mentality is the best thing to do. But any budget that works for you or that you have to kind of reach more people, but be deliberate in what your objective is. Who are you going after? What are you trying to do? Drive focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And have like a goal in mind.
Exactly.
Okay, so if someone is first getting into ads, what channels should a food and bev founder first target when they're looking at ads? Could you speak to some pros and cons of the various types of channels?
Yeah.
And what they might expect or want to focus on for that very first?
Yeah. I don't know, because I think it could be different for all of them, but I can kind of tell you how we look at our channels. I think social tends to be something that people lean in first on because they've got some sort of presence there already, whether they've got an organic following or they've been posting organically, or if it's, information about their product or their store, location information. So I think, that's always a place. And like I said, it can be pretty efficient from a CPM standpoint. So you can reach a lot of people there. Search is really impactful for a direct response. It just depends on, there's so many nuances in search and keywords and some of that stuff. But like, in a Pizza Hut world, it was a very important channel for us. We wanted to own pizza search term or pizza delivery search term, right? Because we could see that it led to high conversion, but that can also be, depending on the keyword, a pretty expensive ad format, but it does drive kind of that direct response. Online video, again, a very effective channel because you've got a little bit more time. Again, people are going or like a YouTube are going to watch videos, so they're kind of leaned in. They've got sound on, so a lot of your social platforms, they don't have sound on, so you don't have that like visual and audio. So I would recommend, if you do video, to make sure your brand is visible, but also make sure you're saying it, so that people are kind of getting that double, or if their eyes divert away because they know it's an ad, they're hearing your brand if they're not just seeing it. If they're getting both, it's even more impactful. Mm-hmm. But those can be a little bit more expensive. Snapchat is interesting in their platform, and Instagram's getting to this too, where they've got this kind of AR capability with their lenses or filters and stickers and personalization, which is really cool and engaging, and you can kind of spread your reach through earned, where people are sharing it or taking pictures. But again, those tend to be pretty expensive, so we always try to balance it out with just Snap ads to kind of keep that efficiency side. And so sometimes that's good, but that's, whatever your objective is. Are you looking for engagement and earned and shares, or are you trying to drive reach? So you might choose a more efficient tactic over an effective tactic on a channel like that. Mm-hmm. Audio has been very interesting. So the iHearts or Pandoras or Spotifys of the world, people are spending a lot of time in audio now, with not just music, but podcasts, and that whole world is blowing up. And so that's been very interesting in the sense of this kind of sonic identity. So without a visual, how do you get your message across? And so I think you can tell, I don't know, I listen to a lot of podcasts. You see a lot of smaller companies, a lot of direct response companies, because you've got that host Red. It's kind of that mix of like an influencer, but also like a testimonial recommendation, and then they're usually longer, so you can really get your message across. So you see a lot of companies and brands leaning into that. And podcasts used to be, more higher household income, but now there's podcasts for everybody. And so that's been an interesting landscape. And then, just in streaming audio with like a Pandora and a Spotify. But you have to really think about what that, they're calling it sonic identity. What is your brand? You always think about like the McDonald's little tune. You don't have to see a McDonald's logo when you hear that little tune, it's McDonald's.
Yeah.
But even without something like that, like your brand or how you're getting your message across, for us in food, we're doing a lot of testing because that appetite appeal, you can't have that visual of a bite and smile or people enjoying the products. You have to like bring that to life in audio. So that's also interesting. People are spending a lot of time there. OTT, so the Hulus of the world, where people are kind of cutting the cord on linear and spending a lot of time where they can be ad supported, right? Like a Netflix isn't ad supported, so there's a lot of eyeballs there, and we can't put our ads there. But where can we get them when they're shifting from linear? Because their behavior is not changing. They're still watching TV. A majority of it is happening in your living room on your TV screen. So it's very impactful. It's like the most leaned in experience, although they could be, on their phone and things like that. That's why I always say, make sure you've got that audio, cue.
Yeah.
That's a little bit more expensive, but it is very impactful because of the medium that it's being delivered in. People are going there for long form content. It's, positioned in the middle. So there's a lot of channels, and it's really, again, what your objective is, who your audience is, that really kind of helps you. But I think your budget can also help you, right? And as if you start measuring conversion, where you're willing to pay a little bit more for that impression versus not, and kind of balancing that ROI.
Yeah.
You might, if you have a limited budget, you might lean into more of the efficient channels. And kind of start testing something. But if you got more of a complicated message or a more premium, product that you really gotta lean into, a bag of chips is not that high of a price tag. So we gotta sell a lot of them. Whereas you might have more high-end products. And so more of that higher impact unit might drive that conversion more so than driving for efficiencies. So you just have to really kind of understand what your objectives are and what channel is going to be best for you.
Yeah, great advice. Follow up from that, we've got Fred Mondo asks, how are you tracking campaigns on radio, and when would you recommend activations on local stations? So speaking more to that radio channel of marketing.
Yeah. So, we do radio here. I've done radio in the past on the border. We did a lot of localized radio. And so we used to do market-based tests to really understand the lift that we were getting. So buying local radio in a market and then not buying it in a very similar market and kind of seeing the difference. And understanding, is it truly driving that lift that you need it to? Radio is also still impactful. People spend a lot of time in their cars, a lot of time on the radio, or when you're, if you've ever noticed when you walk in somewhere, the radio's on, so you're exposed to radio a lot. I will say, like, just in my past, local radio tends to be a little bit more expensive than if you were able to buy it nationally. So I think that's what we look at the Frito side. But, like in my past on the border, we had to buy local radio just based, we didn't have restaurants across the nation. But we did see it drive our business, especially with people on the go, on their way home, reminding them of dinner or value or things like that. we've seen it be successful as part of the marketing mix.
Yeah, that's great. I love the idea of testing it in 2 different markets to be able to see what that pickup is, because it isn't digital, right? You can't see how many clicks or listens.
No.
So
Yeah,
that's a
you don't
really
get it.
great way to try to measure that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you got to be a little bit more creative when you don't have that from, digital's been helpful in giving some of that data for us. Then you kind of over analyze it sometimes when you have the data. But not all channels you can do that. So you kind of have to lean in your gut and your instinct, or try to do something like that, like a match market test to measure impact.
Mm-hmm. Similarly to this different channels, this is kind of just out of curiosity. Have you ever worked on a Super Bowl commercial? What is that like, and how do you measure ROI from that? Because that is national, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky enough to work for PepsiCo, and they're obviously big Super Bowl partners, and own the halftime, and we've got beverages and snack brands that have participated in Super Bowl ads. So in the past we've had Doritos, and that's a very, like, to really think about a full 360, because the Super Bowl is the only time that people actually want to seek your ad out and talk about advertising. It's like a relevant conversation. So for marketers, it's like, oh my gosh, to be a part of that conversation, people actually want to talk about ads and the best ads and things like that, and just not just the industry, like consumers. So the Super Bowl is just one of those cultural events, right, that not only from a sports perspective, but super for commercials, and now you've got the Puppy Bowl, and there's just so many things that happen on that day that for a marketer it's a dream. So I have had the experience of being a part of a big team and activating on Super Bowl, and it's to be on a stage like that, and have your brand on a stage like that, and just be a part of a big team that was able to make that happen and it be successful is something that I'm very fortunate and I value it in my career. But it's just an interesting time, again, just from an earned perspective and how consumers are really interacting with marketing and advertising. There's only a few times that they're willing to do that. Super Bowl's one of them. So
yeah,
Doritos has been a really good brand and kind of owning that conversation in the past, and they've done it in multiple ways with Crash the Super Bowl, where fans could, were making the ads, to launching new products.
Oh yeah, I remember that campaign. That was very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in our last minute here. I want to ask one final question to you, which is, what are the top 3 things that a solo founder should be doing right now to market their product?
I think that's so hard to answer.
Okay, top 1 thing.
Because I don't think I, have all the answers for you. I will say that, I think a website and social presence is very important. So if people are trying to search for you or search about information for you and they can't find that, that's very frustrating. If you just think about it as a consumer, as your own self, and you're searching for things, everyone's going to their phone now and looking for the answer. So I think that presence of your company, where they can find you, what products do you have, a very easy user experience. I think those things are very important. Like your presence online is super important in the way that if you have a retail or in-person interaction with a customer, you want that to be very seamless and pleasant. You want the same thing in the digital world. But you're not there to control that interaction. So how you build out that experience and how your information is accessible to consumers when they're looking for it is, I think, very important.
Yeah.
and that takes investment. I understand that, like from a website standpoint, but also just in social, and as our people are looking at or going to different sources and searching things, you can build out those presence there. In the restaurant world, like I said, like Google Maps and Yelp and Facebook locations, and like we just wanted to make sure they could find us and find us very easily. So I think that's very important. Your branding and your creative and just making sure it's clear who you are and what you stand for. That brick to forehead communication, especially in paid, what do you want them to walk away with? And then if you start getting into paid, just keeping that consistent and really just focusing on an objective, making sure, what channel you're on, what audience you're buying to, and what creative you're serving them is going to hit that objective. And so whether it's you or your agency or a partnership between, just making sure you're always focused.
Awesome. Really, really great advice, Amanda. I know there are a few questions we didn't get to here. If you want to ask any more questions, please visit the WomanMade community at helloalice.com, and we'll do our best to answer them and maybe get Amanda in there as well. There were a couple about what's like the first 101 kind of course that I should take on this. We do actually have free guides on Alice that we will include in the follow-up email along with the recording of this webinar. So you can dig in and start really just getting into the nitty-gritty on marketing and getting your message out there. So
absolutely,
I want to say thank you again so much, Amanda, for your time, for sharing all of this really, really insightful knowledge. And thanks to PepsiCo and WomanMade for helping make this possible. And we're just honored at Alice to be a part of this and to help get this information out to the business owners that need it. So thanks everyone who was able to join as well. And you'll get an email from us shortly with all these great follow-ups and the recording.
Awesome. Thank you guys. It's been a pleasure to participate and meet all of you guys. So thanks for letting me be a part of your community.
Thank you, Amanda. Bye, everyone.